Listen up, you guys. Today, you are going to learn more about photography in 10 minutes than you will from doing anything else. Let's get into it. All right, listen up, you guys. I've been teaching photography for over 10 years. Let's call it 12 years because that's what it is. And there's one thing I have learned about how people learn photography, and it's this. I think you can learn more about how to be a good photographer from seeing what other beginning photographers do right and what other beginning photographers do wrong. We're going to take the next 10 minutes and we're going to look at a bunch of photos on leading lines that came from you guys, and I'm going to tell you what you did right and what you did wrong, and hopefully you can use that to become better photographers. Let's do it. All right, let's start by taking a look at this first photo here. Love this photo. I think it's a great image to start out with. Let's talk about why this works so well. We got a handful of things that are happening here that make this a great photo. One, our lines start outside of the frame behind the camera and they lead right into the subject. That's awesome. That's exactly what we want to happen. Two, we got really cool colors in this photograph. Our dominant colors in this photo are yellow and blue, almost a little bit of orange in there. Yellow and blue and orange and blue photograph really well together. And so that's what we want. We want to combine those two colors that look good together. And you'll notice these lines come in. The road is interesting. This is a cool old road. The road has some texture in it and some cracks and things that make it interesting. And of course, the yellow makes it interesting. But all of our lines lead us in and take us right to this really cool sky. If we don't have this cool of a sky, if this is just a gray, cloudy day and it's kind of out, it's not going to work. It's not nearly as good of a photo as it is. So great job with this one. The sky works really well with the foreground and it all ties together and takes us on a nice little journey, tells a good story. So great photo. Really like this photo as well. Love the colors, green and blue, also photograph well together. So awesome job there. You'll notice these lines don't start outside of the frame, and guess what? Totally okay with that because they're cool lines. They're interesting and they do their job of leading us into the photos. We usually want our lines to start outside of the frame and lead us in, but it doesn't always have to, and that's okay. I like how these lines don't necessarily lead right to something, but they do definitely take us in the photo. And once we get there, we travel around and we see this really cool sky, and it's a really neat photo. I love the symmetry in this photo. You guys know bonus points for symmetry and leading lines. It really makes the photos more interesting, and the photographer's done a great job of making this mostly symmetrical. The only thing I would fix on this one, you guys, is this down here. I don't really feel like that needs to be there. I'd probably just come in here into Lightroom, grab the crop tool, bring that up to right about there, and then I like that a lot better. I like that a lot better. Much more interesting photo. Well done. Let's talk about these next three photos. They all have technically leading lines. They all have a line that starts outside of the frame and leads into the frame, but they got big problems here. One, none of these lines are very interesting, right? They're not very interesting lines. This one is at least kind of curvy. That's kind of cool. And then they don't really take us anywhere. Look, this line comes in and where does it go? Like what? I don't even know what our subject is in this photo. The sky is really boring. This tree's kind of interesting, but it's a little out of focus and really small. These, I don't know. I'm not sure what the subject is. Same thing could be said for this photo right here. The line comes in, takes us on a little journey, but where do we go? We just got, to me, this is just a picture of a parking lot and a big orange building with a little steeple in the background. Not that interesting. Same thing here. You could argue that this line at least takes us to like a cool landscape of the city, but I don't know. It's not that interesting or exciting. There's nothing that interesting going on back there. And I say, let's just move on from this one. So what do we learn from these three photos? One, the line needs to be interesting. If all the line is going to do is take us to something, it still needs to be an interesting line. If the line's not going to take us to a subject, it needs to be a phenomenally interesting line. Here's a great example of a much more interesting road that does take us to an interesting subject. Let's compare this one and this one because they're kind of similar photos. This one is much more interesting because we have the yellow lines to really help lead us into. Notice this doesn't have those lines. So this to me is a much stronger line that takes us into the photo. I like the little bit of curve, not little bit of curve. I like the lot of curve in this photo that takes us into the photo. And I like that it leads us to a more interesting landscape with a nice little sunset going on back there. So big, big difference between this photo where the line's not that interesting and the subject's not that interesting, and this one where the line's more interesting and our background, our subject is also much more interesting. And then it's a neat little trick that I love what this photographer did. If it's dark or dusk, park your car just out of the frame and turn your headlights on. It'll splash a little bit of light onto this subject here and make it more interesting. Oh my gosh, I love this photo so much, you guys. I love it. And this is why I'm always talking to you guys about lighting, right? You got to be out early in the morning, late in the afternoon, just as the sun's coming up or just as it's going down. Those are the best times to be taking photos because it makes your photographs so much more interesting. And this is a perfect perfect example of that. You can see this photograph has these awesome, phenomenal lines that lead us right into this nice horizon. I don't care that the horizon's a little bit out of focus, not a big deal at all. We can totally still tell what's going on, and I like that it gives it a little bit of a softer feel. But if we don't have this awesome, phenomenal sunset lighting back here that's literally affecting the entire photograph, everything from a little splash of sunlight right there, this photo is way less interesting. So great job there making this photo more interesting by using lighting. My only concern is this horizon. It's just the tiniest bit crooked. And you guys are always going to hear me talk about this. Horizon lines need to either be perfectly straight, or they need to be way crooked like that, which is going to ruin this photo. We don't want to do that. Or they need to be perfectly straight like that. Ah, that feels better. Notice too, this horizon line on the rule of thirds spot. Nice job. Nice job there, man. All right. I have a very soft spot in my heart for photos like these. You guys know that. I used to take this photo all the time when I was just starting out in photography. Let's call it 30 years ago. I was 14 years old, and I used to take this picture constantly, and I always loved it. I do really actually enjoy the lines in this photo that they come in and they take us up on this journey. I love the colors in the leaves. I do wish the sky was blue. I think that would have made it a much more interesting photo, especially since we have some yellow and green in the leaves. But on the other hand, I kind of like the muted feel this photograph has, and I think it works. Oh, I had to really think about if I liked this photo or not, and it turns out I do. You'll notice the lines here. They don't come from behind the camera that I'm always saying, you gotta have the lines come from behind the camera. Not always true. We've already seen that. Here they're in front of the camera. They do start outside of the frame though, and they all lead us right up. They all take us right to this, what are these things called? Lighthouse. They all take us right to the lighthouse here, and it does a great job. It is a little bit crooked. I'd like to see that lighthouse straightened up a little bit, but because it's shot so tight like this, if we try to rotate it and straighten it, right about there, that should be straight, but in doing so, I cut off the top of the lighthouse, and I just don't want to do that because we need the whole lighthouse. So keep that in mind when you're shooting, especially if you know you might be doing some cropping. Give yourself a little more space to work with. You don't always have to be in as tight as possible, although I do like that. I love this photo. Love this photo so much. The lines are subtle in this photo. Look at them. They kind of come in. They're not like really like in your face, like here we are. They just come in nice and easy, and these nice blue lines lead us right to our subject here. Great lighting in this photograph. Great editing in Lightroom. I love the blue over here with the blue over here, and I love this little splash of yellow in the background there. I think it kind of just adds a little bit of balance to the photo. Phenomenal job taking us into this photograph. This is a great example of using lines to draw your viewer right into your subject or model. Great job on this photo. All right, let's talk about this photo and this photo because they're both of a basketball on a subtle or small leading line that takes us into the photograph. This one to me doesn't work, yet this one works really, really well. How come? Well, this one, notice the line is not really connected to the subject. This is a curved line that leads to a basketball, just like this one is. So why does this one not work? Well, this isn't where basketballs go. I mean, maybe when you're done, you kick it over to the side of the yard and it hangs out there. But a basketball should be on the basketball court, not in the grass up against a curb. There's no connection there, you guys. There's no relation between the leading line and the subject, which in this case is the basketball. Whereas this photo, there's a connection there because this is a basketball court. It's where a basketball should be. It makes sense. Also, the court is more interesting than this one was. Notice the cracks in the court, the blue color and the orange. We've already talked about how blue and yellow, blue and orange photograph really well together, and we're seeing that here in this photograph. This photograph works so much better than the other one because the subject and the line are connected to each other. They're related. All right, horizontal leading lines that are just start on one side and lead us out the other one. I don't know, you guys. I just don't feel that much of a connection to them. I don't really feel like the horizontal lines draw us into the photo the way I want them to. And I just don't think they work nearly as well as lines that start behind us or just in front of us and lead us into the photograph. Some people would argue, well, yeah, but this line does lead us from left to right through the photo. Yeah, maybe. I think what I would have done is I would have taken this shot. I would have taken the camera, put it right over here. I would have been looking into the creek and watching the water flow past the camera, down the creek. And I think that would have made it a lot more interesting, a better angle. I would have put the camera just right over the top of this little waterfall looking that way. And I think that would have really worked. The sides of the creek would have been our leading lines. And then we would have got rid of all this. Look at all this up here. We don't need any of this. None of this is helping tell a story of our photograph. Same with down here, just not really helping, not really doing much. This right here should have been our photo. Very similar situation here. We got a ton of horizontal lines. I love the way the photographer got these lines nice and straight. That's not easy to do, but this doesn't really work for me for leading lines because none of these lines really take us anywhere. They just kind of take us from here to here, from here to here, but they don't lead us into the photo. They lead us kind of past the photo. It's kind of just like, oh, oh, there was that photo, right? We never really even get a good look at it. You might make an argument, well, the tree is a leading line. It starts outside of the frame and leads in. Sort of, maybe, not really. I'm going to say no on that one. Maybe instead, we take the bike, we put somebody riding it right here in the bike path, and then we take the camera and put it over here, put it down, looking back towards the person on the bike. Then we have the leading lines coming from the road and the sidewalk and the white line on the road, and that's going to be a much more interesting photograph. Not every photograph needs to have leading lines, you guys, and this is a great example of a photo that could have been good, but it's not really a leading lines photo. It starts, I don't really know what the lines are. You could maybe argue that this is the line over here, and it starts over here and leads us into the photograph, but I don't really feel like it does. Think about how you read a book. You read a book from left to right, right? This is left, I think. Yes, it is. You read a book from left to right, and that's how we're used to looking at things. So we kind of want our lines to go from left to right and take us through the scene, but they don't really. Maybe there's a little bit of a line here that starts and comes out, but this is just, to me, it's not a strong leading lines photo, and that's okay. That's okay. This is also why we don't mix shade and sunlight, because what will happen when we do that is we either end up exposing for the shade, meaning we make the shade look good, but the sunlight gets too bright, or we end up exposing for the sunlight, and that looks good, but the shade gets too dark. So as new photographers, you really want to avoid mixing shade and sunlight. Either be photographing in the shade or be photographing in the sunlight, but don't try to mix the two together, because unless you know what you're doing, it's not going to work. All right, love this photo right here. You'll often hear me say, why did you take a picture of the back of that person's head? But I think in this case, it works because you've got these girls and they're on this path, and you'll notice the lines start down here and they lead us into the photograph and take us on this little journey. And I think it works really, really well. I'm totally okay with not seeing their faces, because this to me is a story about two girls who are starting out on an adventure. They're young, they're connected, they're holding hands, they're on this journey together, and we don't know where they're going. And that's really cool, I think. That's really cool. So great job on this photograph. I love the story it tells of the journey that these girls are going to go on, and it works really, really well. All right, last one, and I love this photograph. I saved this one for last. This was actually taken by a guy who's been doing photography for well over 3 years, so not all of these are from beginners. I love this photo. I love it, love it, love it. I love the story it tells, and I know what you're thinking. You're saying, wait a minute, Johnson, this literally breaks every single rule you just told us about on that waterfall photo, and you're right, it does. Notice the lines go from right to left, and you just said, Johnson, oh, you gotta have your lines go from left to right because it's how books are, blah, blah, blah. Get out of here with that nonsense, you guys. These lines are super obvious. There's no question about that. They are starting over here and leading us into the photo. So it's totally okay that they're coming from right to left. Well, you just said, Johnson, you can't mix shade and sunlight. If you're brand new, you probably shouldn't. But if you've been doing photography for a long time and know how to control your exposure like this photographer did, you can get away with it. I love these lines coming from the shadows off of these bars in the railing here, and I think it works really, really well, and it makes the photograph much more interesting, and I think that's awesome. Great job, great story. I love this shot right here. Phenomenal way to end. If you were paying attention, you just learned what works and what doesn't work and how to make your leading lines photos better. And like I said at the start, this to me is the best way to learn, is seeing what did people do right, what did people do wrong, and now do the things that they did right and avoid the things that they did wrong, and you're gonna become a better photographer. All right, thanks for watching, you guys. If you haven't done so yet, please gently place your mouse cursor over the like button and lightly press your mouse. Don't slap it. And if you haven't yet, please also gently press that subscribe button. Have a great day, you guys.